Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivardhari Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamunatira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Srila Prabhupada ki, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. Jai Om Vishnu Pad Parahamsa Parivrajacharya Ashtatar Shata Shri Srimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki, Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda ki. Prem se kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda ki. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gop Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan ki. Shri Vrindava Dham ki. Shri Mayapur Dham ki. Ganga Mai ki. Yamuna Mai ki. Bhakti Devi ki. Tulasi Devi ki. Transcendental Harinam Sankirtan Yagya ki. Transcendental Book Distribution ki. Gaur Premanande. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to the assembled devotees. Oh, glories to Sri Sri Guru and Gauranga. Oh, glories to Srila Prabhupada. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gourangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Rishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha kripasindubhyaiva cha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Namo Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swamini Namine Namaste Saraswati Deva Gauravani Pacharine Nirvishesha Shunivadi Paschachati Shatarine Chaitanya Charanam Bhoja Makaranda Liho Bhaje Yesham Prasade Matrena Paramo Pyamaro Bhavit Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Nangayate Girim Yad Kripatam Aham Bande Paramananda Madhavam. Hare Krishna. So we're reading today from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrta, Volume 4, written by Satsvarup Goswami Maharaj. And we're on the section entitled Unlimited Opportunity, Limited Time. And then we'll go over onto the section entitled London, a Dream Fulfilled. So we're here in Los Angeles, and it's 1969. And Srila Prabhupada, he's visiting the center here in Los Angeles, and he's installed Radha and Krishna deities. And he was emphasizing the point that the real installation took place when there was Sankirtan. So even when the deities were installed at Krishna Balaram temple, there were so many elaborate arrangements, so many different yagyas taking place to install the deities. But he said there as well that the real factor that installed the deities was Harinam, Sankirtan. And this was necessary for deity worship. And then Srila Prabhupada, he stresses that the devotees, they must maintain their enthusiasm and they must never neglect the deities. The devotees, they should think, how can I serve Krishna? How should I dress him? And Srila Prabhupada says, if you think that this is a brass-made idol, then it will remain brass-made idol to you forever. But if you elevate yourself to a higher platform of Krishna consciousness, then Krishna, this very Krishna, will talk with you. This Krishna will talk with you. So I don't know if any of our pujaris here at Shri Radharanath have had that experience, but that's what Prabhupada said. Krishna, he will actually speak with you if you elevate your consciousness enough. And what's interesting is that when Srila Prabhupada trained Yamuna Devi in deity worship, he showed a very simple worship. So Mandakini Mataji, she was saying that the mood in which he trained Yamuna and his early disciples, the mood with which they worshipped the deities was very personal, not so strict, more spontaneous. And they were seeing Krishna as being like their friend rather than worshipping them in a mood of awe and reverence. But here in Los Angeles, the standard was higher. Srila Prabhupada set a higher standard for them to follow. And then when the leaders of the Los Angeles temple came to London, where Mandakini was busy worshipping the deities, then they were explaining that, no, you can't worship Krishna like this with a spontaneous mood. You have to be in the mood of awe and reverence, and you have to be very strict. And Mandakini was thinking, but Prabhupada taught me this way, and now they're telling me I must do it another way. And then she changed. Then she started worshipping in the same way that they were instructing her. And she wrote a letter to Srila Prabhupada to explain the change. And he was actually displeased. He said, no, once you've established a certain standard of worship in a certain mood, you should maintain that. So what was applicable in one area for certain devotees was not necessarily applicable for another area. Like we can see the mood in Jagannath Puri, the way that they worship the Lord, it's very spontaneous, and not so much in the mood of awe and reverence as it is that the devotees are taking care of Jagannath like a friend. But here at Sri Sri Radharanath we have a higher standard, we have a different mood. At all the different temples there will be a slightly different mood, but the standard should be maintained. Whatever that standard is should be maintained. It shouldn't change. That's what Prabhupada was emphasizing. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says, all the various services were actually the spiritual master's responsibility, he said. And when a disciple cleaned the temple or performed any service, he did so as the spiritual master's assistant. And any job done improperly was the spiritual master's anxiety. If the devotees whimsically changed the deity worship or neglected the temple, then Prabhupada, more than any disciple, would feel distress. So Srila Prabhupada is most pleased when the service is going on nicely, and he's the one who's most in distress. And it's interesting, when we think about a pure devotee, we don't often think that the pure devotee does experience distress. The pure devotee does experience depression. Actually, a very elevated Vaishnav, one of Srila Prabhupada's disciples, explained to me that yes, he does get depressed, of course, but their depression and their distress is only in Krishna consciousness. So they do feel anxiety, they do feel depression, they do experience all these emotions, but whereas ours are all material and based, well, not all of them, but much of the time it's just based on sense gratification. And whereas the pure devotee, he experiences all these emotions, but it's just purely in Krishna consciousness. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says that anxiety for serving Krishna was the greatest satisfaction. As Bhaktivinoda Thakur has stated, the trouble I encounter in your devotional service, I will consider the greatest happiness. So he's praying to the Lord, whatever trouble, whatever difficulty I'm going through to serve you, Krishna, that is my greatest happiness. That is the greatest satisfaction. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says that satisfaction for the devotee lay in pleasing the previous spiritual masters, and that was best accomplished by preaching to the fallen souls. So how many times have we heard it that we should distribute books? And our previous acharyas, even Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he instructed that we should print books, we should distribute books. And he was so pleased if even one flyer was distributed, even just one flyer. And then Srila Prabhupada, he says again and again, please distribute books, distribute books. So they're pleased, they're so pleased when we're preaching. And then we will feel satisfied in our spiritual because our spiritual masters are satisfied. And that satisfaction, Srila Prabhupada says, when we're distributing books, is because Lord Chaitanya is embracing us. So if we want to feel the embrace of the Lord, then all we have to do is go out with some books. And it's so simple. It's actually so simple. How do we please our spiritual masters? It's so simple. Just take some books out and go and chant and preach. And even a young child can do that. Like Saraswati, she was just a young girl, and she explained to Prabhupada, or she demonstrated to Prabhupada how she preaches. She just says, Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. That's all. That's all she knew, and that's all she said. And Prabhupada said, that's perfect preaching. That's all you have to say. Even if you only know this much, it's fine. Go and share it, and then it becomes that much, and then you become increasingly self-realized just by sharing the knowledge, so that you can share more. And there's so much mercy in just sharing. And if we're finding some stagnation in our sadhana, in our enthusiasm, then going out and sharing is a way to really pick that all back up in the best possible way, because we experience that reciprocation from pleasing Guru. And there, Hari Suri, Satsvarup Prabhu explains that even in dealings between spiritual master and disciple, a sense of loving competition prevailed, each wanting to serve the other, neither seeking service for himself. So there's this kind of competition that Guru is actually seeing himself as being servant to his disciple. How can I assist this jiva's soul and going back to Godhead. And the jiva, he's just thinking, how can I serve my spiritual master? What can I do to please him in the best possible way? And then there's a comparison between this given with the gopis in Vrindavan, that when they see Krishna, they are so happy to see him that they're smiling and they become even more beautiful. And then when Krishna sees them smiling, he becomes happy, he smiles and he becomes beautiful. And then it goes on like this. They see him smiling and becoming more beautiful, then they smile more and become more beautiful, and it just keeps going, that reciprocation. And then it is said here, this was pure devotional service, to be free from all material desires and to serve Krishna as directed by the spiritual master and the scriptures. And so it's being pointed out to us that the disciples of Srila Prabhupada, and I'm sure many of his followers, his grand disciples, they're engaging in pure devotional service. That's what we're reading. It's pure devotional service. They're free from all material desires. They're just serving Krishna as directed by a spiritual master. And one time Srila Prabhupada was actually asked, how many pure devotees are there on the planet, Srila Prabhupada? And he said, how many devotees are there in ISKCON? He was saying, all of my followers, all of my disciples, they're all pure devotees. And Srila Prabhupada, he was most pleased. So Guru is most pleased when worship of the deity is going on nicely and when the preaching is going on nicely. And he's most displeased if a disciple falls away, if somebody leaves. He's the one who's most displeased. And at one of the temples, there was a disciple of Srila Prabhupada's who had stolen money, and he left the temple. And Srila Prabhupada was very determined to go and see this disciple because he had done a lot for the movement before doing this. And when Srila Prabhupada met with him, this disciple didn't say anything. He was quite an intense person, and he didn't say a word. And Srila Prabhupada was actually crying, and he was begging him. He was asking, why have you left? What have I done? I must have done something to have made you leave. And Srila Prabhupada was actually weeping tears and crying that his disciple had left. So he was most displeased when anyone left or fell away. And then it's written here, although his disciples saw him as the most exalted Vaishnava and intimate associate of Lord Krishna, they knew he was always available to guide them in their services. He was their leader, but he was with them. He was far above them, but he remained close to them. So this is, Srila Prabhupada, he was an Uttama Adhikari coming down to the level of Madhyam. So although he was way ahead of anybody, still he associated with his disciples in such a way that he was relatable, he was accessible, and he guided them very personally. And then it's said here that there was a few occasions though where we could see that Srila Prabhupada kind of left us behind. Like one time when he was at Los Angeles at this deity installation, he was speaking directly to Krishna, and he was saying, Krishna, I am most rotten and fallen, but I have brought this thing for you. So he was making an offering to Krishna, and he was saying, please take it. So except for these rare moments, Prabhupada's disciples saw him preaching and serving along with them. But there were moments where they got to see where Srila Prabhupada really is, or they get to see a glimpse of his exalted position in relation to Krishna and the personal dealings he had with Krishna. And then here we're in July 25, 1969, San Francisco. It's just before the Ratha Yatra festival, the day before. And at the airport, there was a crowd of devotees who had greeted Srila Prabhupada, and some reporters came and they were asking him, what is your opinion on the recent manned US moon landing? So again, asking about the moon landing. I was speaking about this, and I think it was on Saturday, the moon landing. And then Prabhupada asks, shall I flatter you or tell you the truth? And they want to hear the truth. So he says, it is a waste of time. Shri Shri Radha Radhanath ki jai. Shri Giriraj Govardhan ki jai. Shri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So Srila Prabhupada says, it's actually a waste of time because it does not benefit you if you cannot live there. The time could have been better spent in Krishna consciousness. We must go beyond this universe to the spiritual sky, which is eternal, beyond death. Beyond birth, death, old age, and disease. So he's saying, why are you wasting your time going to the moon when you could go far beyond that? You could go to the spiritual world. Just focus on Krishna consciousness in this life instead of trying to go to the moon planet. And then on the day of Rath Yatra, it's very exciting. There's 100 devotees and there's 1,000 people on the street. And there's this huge cart. And there on the cart there's Jagannath, Subhadra, and Balaram. And they're beautifully dressed. They have garlands and different colored pendants. And it's described that the Rath Yatra festivals, they were becoming more and more wonderful every year. And then there was this kirtan, and there was burning frankincense coming from around the cart. And the crowd who had gathered, on the one hand we had some young hippies coming to join, and on the other hand we had some businessmen dressed in their suits and ties, and then there were elderly people and young children. So there was really quite a variety of people, and even stray dogs who came to join the Rath Yatra procession. And then they see that there is a bridge coming up. So the procession is going on and there's a kirtan, but there's a bridge coming up, and the devotees are saying, stop the cart, and they had to stop because because they had this big spire at the top of the cart, and they had this mechanism to lower the spire so that they could go under the bridge, but the mechanism wasn't working. So they were having some trouble with that, and they had to just stop. And then there were so many people waiting to go underneath the bridge, and some people were already there, and the echo was so incredible. You know, the chanting that was going on under the bridge was echoing. And then Srila Prabhupada stood up and he raised his arms and he started dancing. And there's a really nice pastime about how Srila Prabhupada first started dancing in this way, like he jumps up and down. Like before Srila Prabhupada introduced that, the devotees would just do very simple, gentle kind of dancing. And then one day at the Los Angeles temple, Srila Prabhupada started jumping up and down, and the devotees were so amazed, and they thought, wow, we can do that too. And everybody started jumping. And then the devotees called all of the leaders from the other temples, and he said, hey, we don't have to do the Swami step anymore. Prabhupada is jumping. We can all just jump in kirtan. And they were asking, but how do you do it? And they said, you know, you just do it. You just jump ecstatic dancing in kirtan. And then the devotees started jumping, and there was ecstatic kirtan. And here Srila Prabhupada is doing the same. He's jumping and dancing. And Bhavananda says the sound was so uproarious that you were deafened under the bridge. And Prabhupada was dancing, jumping on the cart, and everyone went wild. And Narayan says he was dancing and his garlands broke and the flowers began cascading everywhere as he danced up and down. And Tamal Krishna says, people went crazy seeing him in complete ecstasy. And then Srila Prabhupada sat down, but the cart still wasn't going. And the people, the crowd, they started roaring, and Prabhupada is asking, what is it that they want? And then Tamal Krishna says, I think they want you to dance again. So he gets up again and he starts dancing. And then eventually they get the canopy to come down. And now there were about 10,000 people who had joined this procession. And in Bhavananda, he says that everyone was smiling, everyone was laughing, everyone was in ecstasy, everyone was dancing, everyone was chanting, and we were doing it more than anyone. We were doing more chanting, more laughing and smiling, and feeling more freedom. So he's just explaining that everyone, the whole 10,000 people in the crowd, everybody was chanting and dancing, but the devotees were actually experiencing even more of the ecstasy of chanting and dancing, because they had freedom within the principles of Krishna consciousness, basically, like because they were experiencing the reciprocation of the Lord with their chanting and dancing, which they had been doing for some time. And then Bhavananda says, even if you were a hippie, you couldn't be more far out than the Ratha Yatra cart and Jagannath, because no one looks more far out than him. The hippies had come dressed up in outfits with big feathers in their hair and everything, but they were dim compared to Jagannath. So Jagannath was very beautifully dressed. Okay, now we're on chapter 30, London, A Dream Fulfilled, and it's September 11, 1969. So now Srila Prabhupada, he's at London airport, and there's a procession of devotees coming to greet Srila Prabhupada, and they're so happy to see him. Sometimes the devotees, they would cry and they would shout out, Jai Prabhupada, they'd be so happy to see him. And the reporters here, they were asking, so what do you think of this reception that you're getting? And Prabhupada said, I'm not really fond of the reception, but I want to know how people give reception to this movement. That is my concern. And devotees shout, Haribol! And then the reporters, they're asking, what do you try to teach, sir? And Srila Prabhupada says, I am trying to teach what you have forgotten. And then the reporter asks, what is that? And Srila Prabhupada says, that is God. And he's explaining that this is the Krishna consciousness movement. It's teaching about God, and it's a challenge to the atheistic people. So I'm simply preaching that you become Krishna conscious and be happy. Don't be swayed by these nonsense waves of Maya or illusion. And then the reporter asks if singing was the essential substance of our faith. And Srila Prabhupada, he gave a long answer explaining the cleansing effect that the chanting has on the heart. And he was quoting this verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5. It's chapter 18, text number 12, which explains that anyone who is practicing Krishna consciousness has all the good qualities of the demigods, whereas a person who is not practicing has no good qualities at all. So all the good qualities come to a person who starts to practice. And then Srila Prabhupada says, if you want a peaceful society, then you must make people God conscious, Krishna conscious. Everything will be automatically resolved. Otherwise, your so-called United Nations will not help. So many times in different places, Prabhupada talks about this ism and that ism, and then, all of these different methods in the world to try and resolve all the issues. He explains that isn't really what's going to help. What's really going to help is just by making everyone Krishna conscious, then the whole world will become peaceful. Just like how it was under the reign of Maharaj Yudhisthira. Everyone had everything they needed and everyone was satisfied. Everyone was a devotee, basically. Oh, and then Srila Prabhupada, he gets into his car and they're on their way to Tittenhurst. But what's interesting is that Srila Prabhupada's father didn't ever want him to come to England. So here he is in England, and Prabhupada's father never imagined that his son would end up there, because he was worried that the different sinful activities of the people would have an influence on him. But we're seeing that they're not influencing him as much as he's actually just influencing them. So he's coming to preach and save everyone. And he's not at all affected by all of the strange activities going on there. Because Srila Prabhupada lived a very pious life, and he was living in a holy place. And then he comes to America, he comes to the West, and he comes to places like London, where people are engaged in so much sense gratification, and it's quite a shock, I suppose, for someone who's lived in a place where there are so many saintly people not engaging in these kinds of activities. And I was hearing about how Srila Prabhupada really studied the way people in the West lived. He studied the way that they went about their activities so that he could understand how they thought and how he could preach to them in the best way. And it says here, when he had to live alone in New York City without any money, that had been Krishna's mercy. So this is explaining how Srila Prabhupada actually saw everything that took place, all of the difficulties he faced. And even when he was alone and he had nothing, he saw it as Krishna's mercy. And now he was entering England in a limousine, and he was seeing that this is also Krishna's mercy. So he was accepting the ride as a part of Krishna's plan. But Prabhupada remained deeply fixed in his purpose of carrying out the order of his spiritual master, whatever circumstances awaited. So, we chant Ashlisha Va Bhatara Tampinashtumam in the morning, that whether Krishna, whether you handle me roughly by your embrace or make me broken-hearted by not being present before me, still we'll carry on worshiping you and trying to love you. And Srila Prabhupada was in that mood that whatever happened, whether it was bombs, from a war, he just saw that, this is Krishna coming in the form of bombs, or whether it was a car waiting to take him to a very nice place, both were Krishna's mercy. Whatever it was, whatever happened, he just accepted it all as Krishna's mercy. And we can also try to do the same thing, whatever happens. And sometimes Krishna's embrace is difficult, and so we were reading, I was explaining how Srila Prabhupada was saying, when we go in book distribution, we get embraced by Lord Chaitanya, but then that last verse of Sri Shikshastakam is there. Sometimes he handles us roughly by his embrace. So yes, we feel the embrace of the Lord, but sometimes that embrace is not easy. Sometimes the mercy we're getting, it's not easy to accept. Sometimes Krishna glances at us, and sometimes that glance is just so sweet and so wonderful, and sometimes that glance is so difficult to bear, isn't it? When I painted the deities from New Jagannath Puri, I went through a great deal of difficulty trying to paint them, and Bhakti Chaitanya Maharaj said, "Oh yes, Krishna glanced at you," but he didn't know about the difficulty. But I accepted that, this is Krishna's glance. It was so difficult. Sometimes it's like that. We can't understand it, but it's because we need our hearts to be purified. We need them to be purified. But it's all Krishna's mercy. Whatever is happening, it's all his arrangement. Even karma is his arrangement to reform us. Everything is perfectly arranged. It's just perfect. So now they're driving through the countryside, and there are these orchards and fields and grazing horses. And here, George and John and Yoko are there. So from the Beatles, they're with Srila Prabhupada, and he has his lunch. And then they're wanting to speak with him. So they're very fortunate they get to meet Srila Prabhupada and ask him some questions. And Srila Prabhupada explains to them that there's this verse from Bhagavad Gita, Yat Yat Acharati Shreshtash, Tat Tat Eveta Rojana. And he's explaining that the idea is that anything which is accepted by the leading persons, ordinary persons will follow them. And then he was saying that by Krishna's mercy, you are leaders. There are so many thousands of people who follow you and they really like you. So if you could give them something really nice, the whole world would change. And that's in Bhagavatam as well, that if the leaders of society took to Krishna consciousness, the face of the world would change. And then Srila Prabhupada says, you are also anxious to bring some peace in the world. And he explains that he's actually read some of the statements that they were writing, and he's seeing that they're anxious to bring peace in the world, and he's calling them saintly. He's saying every saintly person should be anxious to bring peace in the world. But we must know the process. What is the peace formula that's given to us in the Bhagavad Gita? That those who recognize the Supreme Personality of Godhead as the proprietor of everything, the object of all sacrifices, and the friend of everyone, only such people can find peace. So, linking back to what we were saying earlier, that unless we actually become God conscious, there won't be peace in the world. And here's the formula. Krishna is the proprietor of everything. Everything belongs to him. Everything must be offered to him, and he is the friend of every living entity. And we're seeing here how Srila Prabhupada he's relating to them, and he's able to relate to everybody. And even so many different kinds of people would come to see Srila Prabhupada, and he would always speak to them in such a way that they really appreciated him. They really appreciated what he said and how they dealt with him. And Srila Prabhupada actually said that we should know something about everything and everything about something, so that we can always be relatable to different kinds of people. When we're preaching, we'll meet so many different kinds of people, so we should know how to relate to them and how to speak their language in a way. And then Srila Prabhupada, he's directly encouraging these musicians that they should learn Krishna consciousness and help to teach it to the world. And he's asking them this. And then he explains that the material world is a place of misery. Like here, President Kennedy, people thought he was so fortunate, he was so happy, he was honored throughout the world, but then within a second, he was finished, Prabhupada says. So what is his position now? We lose everything at that moment of death. Although the soul is eternal, we don't know where President Kennedy is. And he can't come back and say, oh yes, I was the president, don't you remember me? Probably he wouldn't even remember who he was. So transmigration of the soul is there, but all of the material acquisitions in this world are all temporary. And Radhanath Maharaj, he gives another example like that, where there was a person who had achieved optimal health. Like usually we all have some kind of health difficulty somewhere along the way, but there was a person who achieved the best health, and he was just perfectly healthy. And then he was walking along the side of the road, he slipped on some oil, and he left his body. So, you know, at any moment, any one of us could just leave our bodies. And it's all temporary. The material acquisitions. And Srila Prabhupada, he speaks about the importance of music in the Vedas. And he speaks about the Sama Veda, how it's full of music, and followers of the Sama Veda, they're always in music. And through musical vibration, they are approaching the Supreme. And then Srila Prabhupada sings a verse. Matirna Krishna Parata Svatova Mito Bipadyeta Griha Vratanam Adanta Gopir Vishatam Tamishram Puna Punascharvita Charvananam. And then he goes on, he quotes a few verses from Bhagavatam, 3 verses. And the verses they're speaking about how if we are just engaging in sense gratification and addicted to materialistic life, then we're actually just chewing the chewed, and approaching hellish conditions repeatedly. But that the goal of life is actually to return back to Godhead and to engage in the service of the Lord. That's the gist of what is said there in the verses. And then Srila Prabhupada explains that to see who is the authority on Krishna consciousness, we need to see who is attached to the Lord. So John, he was asking, how is it that we know which Bhagavad Gita to read, which authority to follow? There are so many translations, and this is Srila Prabhupada's answer, that we will know who our authority is based on how much attachment they have for the Lord, how much are they chanting, do they have affection for Krishna? Some commentators, they don't even mention Krishna. They can't chant his name at all, not even once. So we can understand who our authority is based on this, if we can see that a person has that affection for Krishna. And then Srila Prabhupada okay, so now it's evening time, and Srila Prabhupada is sitting with Shama Sundar, Malati, and Guru Das, and Yamuna, Mukunda, and Janaki. And they were so happy to be with Srila Prabhupada after a year's separation. And then he was talking about how Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur he had preferred temples to be established in the cities, but then of course Srila Prabhupada said, if John could give the place that they were at to Krishna's devotees, then they could maintain cows and cultivate the land, as in New Vrindavan. They would have to see what Krishna desired. So in different places need different preaching styles, and we need to adjust our preaching style according to what is needed, time, place, and circumstance. And so the principles are all there, but we need to see what is it that Krishna desires, what is it that would please Srila Prabhupada most, how do we relate to the people where we are most. So here, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, he thinks that in the cities we should have temples there, because there are lots of people on the one hand, but then on the other hand there are the eco-village projects as well, where they're looking after the cows. So different places, they have different kinds of projects suitable for that place. And then Srila Prabhupada says that the Brahmanas and the Vaishnavas, they had the serious work of cultivating spiritual knowledge and teaching it to others, and they deserved the respect and support of the rest of society. So Srila Prabhupada's movement is cultivating Brahmanas. All of us are trying to cultivate Brahminical qualities, and what do Brahmanas do? They teach, they preach. That's what they do. Whatever it is they know, they're teaching. So he was just speaking a bit about them. And then Srila Prabhupada says that because they had chanted Hare Krishna with faith, they had succeeded. Whereas some of his godbrothers, they had also tried to preach Krishna consciousness in the West, but they didn't succeed. And he was saying because they had faith. They weren't great scholars, they weren't renunciates, but all they had was faith in the holy name and the order of their spiritual master. And Srila Prabhupada said about himself that he was not a great scholar, but he had staunch faith, and that was the real requirement for spiritual success. So, Bhakti Devi, she doesn't depend on scholarship, she doesn't depend on austerity all it is that she depends on is that faith that we have in chanting, that faith that we have in carrying out Guru's order. And she mysteriously appears within the heart, from the heart of the pure devotee who has Bhakti Devi, because Bhakti comes from the pure devotee, from his heart. That's where it comes from. Krishna prasade by Bhakti Lata Bij. And Srila Prabhupada says a devotee could go to many places and accomplish many things, but unless he was free of material motives, he would not be able to implant the seed of bhakti into the hearts of others. Even one lone preacher could accomplish many things for Krishna, provided the preacher was free from sense gratification and the desire for profit, adoration, and distinction. So Srila Prabhupada is saying that he's giving philosophy, but he's living the example. He was the lone preacher who had accomplished so many things for Krishna because he is free from sense gratification. And then he's, it's applicable to his disciples and followers as well, who have accomplished so many things in this movement. And then Srila Prabhupada, at this time, he's working on Krishna book because he was concerned that he wouldn't be able to finish the commentaries of the 10th canto before he left his body. So although he was actually busy working on the 3rd canto, he wanted to make sure that the commentary on 10th canto was completed. So he was working on that at the same time. And Srila Prabhupada would go for his morning walk, and even though the weather there was not very good for him, he explained that the climate, it's not at all suitable for him. Still, he would go every day without fail because he was so steady and so consistent and regulated in his routine that he would go every day on his morning walk in his big black jacket and boots. And they were having some difficulty where they were building their temple in Bloomsbury. That the neighbors had started to complain about the renovation that was taking place. And Srila Prabhupada said that they should do everything to try and prevent the delays or the obstacles to establishing the temple. And he was just demonstrating how devotional service is absolute, that and how his disciples, they may have to go into the city every day to try and work with the officials and make sure that everything is going on nicely. And then there's a point that comes up that it's a higher service to accept what needs to be accepted, rather than just doing what we want to do. So even if it's something that is difficult for us, or even if it's not necessarily within our comfort zone, it's higher to do that service which is needed to be done than just doing what we want to do because it's easy for us. And then Srila Prabhupada says that, he often says that a Vaishnav is not a retired person who only sleeps and eats and chants Hare Krishna, but rather a Vaishnava fights for Krishna, as did Arjuna and Hanuman. And as the devotee tries his best, working in full surrender, Krishna supports and protects him. So Arjuna, he wasn't particularly happy about fighting his relatives, but still he accepted that position because he knew that was pleasing to Krishna. He did what was needed to be done. Okay, we have to stop there. There was so much more, but we're not going to get to that. Okay, are there any comments, questions, or corrections? Yes, Ravindra.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. My question to this point, did Srila Prabhupada, before he can leave this world, did he think about creating another canto of Srimad Bhagavatam?
You're asking if, before he left this world, did he think about creating another Srimad Bhagavatam canto? I don't know if I really understand your question, but I think you're asking if Srila Prabhupada, like, what was his aim in terms of the cantos of Srimad Bhagavatam, how much he wanted to achieve in writing the translations and the purpose before leaving his body. Is that right? Is that what you're asking? Mm-hmm. Well, as far as I understand, and you can correct me or explain more, but Srila Prabhupada wanted to write the purports and he wanted to translate and write the purports for all of the cantos, but he didn't have so much time because his health wasn't good, and he knew that he would leave his body, shortly or within a period of time, so he couldn't necessarily reach that canto. And so even though here now he's working on the third canto, he wanted to make sure that the commentary to the 10th canto was complete. Even if he didn't reach the end of the third canto or even the fourth canto, he wanted to make sure that that was done, because it's a very deeply philosophical, esoteric subject matter which has to be dealt with the most care. So he wanted to just make sure that Krishna's smile was dealt with properly. Can you add something to that?
Swarup was talking about the completion of the Bhagavatam. And you rightfully said so, that Prabhupada didn't complete it. He didn't even complete the 10th canto fully. Yeah. So the other point, I was just going to make a point. That often devotees say it's Krishna's mercy in every situation, but it's not necessarily so, because in one incident where one of the devotees put salt into the Charanamrita, and the devotee told Prabhupada, it's Krishna's mercy. He said, it's not Krishna's mercy, it's your stupidity.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'll make that point.
Thank you. Yeah, we do make mistakes, and those mistakes aren't necessarily Krishna's mercy. It's just us being conditioned souls. Mm-hmm. Okay, anything else? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.